She stepped onto the carpet in diamonds and silk, only to be told, "You don't belong here." At the 2025 Tony Awards, Meghan Markle arrived expecting flashes, interviews, and applause, but instead faced a silent blockade. Security, acting on specific orders, refused her entry, calling it an unapproved PR stunt. The reason? Alleged fears she planned to hijack the spotlight with a surprise speech tied to her Netflix project, With Love, Meghan. What really happened behind the velvet rope? Who gave the command to shut her out? And why does this moment mark a stunning new low in her public journey? Stay with us as we unpack the tears, the power play, and the fallout that's rattling both Hollywood and royal circles. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. It all started with the sound of cameras clicking. The crowd lining the barricades of the 2025 Tony Awards red carpet surged forward with excitement, their eyes scanning for A-listers and fashion moments. The air was thick with the aroma of designer perfumes and velvet tension. Security guards stood shoulder to shoulder in black suits, earpieces in, scanning faces with trained precision. Reporters held their breath, gripping their microphones tightly, as the arrival of another celebrity was announced. But when the matte black SUV rolled to a stop near the entrance of the red carpet, there was a visible shift in the atmosphere. Not excitement, not applause. Something else. The door opened, and stepping out onto the sidewalk was Meghan Markle, clad in an elegant champagne-colored gown with a dramatic satin train. Her hair was styled into a regal low bun, reminiscent of her wedding day, and diamond-studded earrings sparkled beneath the lights. She looked every inch the former royal, every inch the headline. But within seconds, that image unraveled. A tall security officer stepped directly into her path. No red carpet beneath her feet. No photographers being cued. Instead, just a cold, firm gesture from the man in black. "Ma'am," he said, voice low and professional, "you're not permitted to enter at this time." For a brief moment, the crowd went silent. Meghan blinked, frozen, confused. She looked left and right, searching for a familiar face. Her assistant, a young woman in a headset, stepped forward with a printed credential, one that was swiftly dismissed by a second officer. "This badge isn't active," he said, not even looking up. What followed next played out like a scene from a movie. Meghan tried to compose herself, taking a deep breath, holding her head high, but there was no mistaking the quiver in her lower lip, the way her eyes began to glisten. Photographers, once unsure what was unfolding, suddenly recognized the drama. Flashbulbs erupted. Video cameras rolled. She asked, according to a nearby witness, "Is this a mistake?" But the response was short and unrelenting. "You are not cleared for the event. Please step aside." What could possibly lead to a former working royal, a global household name, being refused entry to one of Broadway's most glamorous nights? That question is what this story aims to answer. Because behind the red carpet denial lies a series of calculated moves, bruised egos, unsanctioned plans, and perhaps even an orchestrated warning sent loud and clear from the upper echelons of the entertainment industry. Sources inside the event's planning committee claim they had been tipped off about a possible, unsanctioned media grab. Not a scandal in the traditional sense, no broken laws, no dress code violation, but something subtler, more reputationally volatile. "This is not your press moment," one official was reportedly heard saying behind the curtain. "Not your moment." Those words landed like a dagger. Precise, deliberate, designed to slice through the illusion that Meghan still had the industry's unwavering favor. But how did it get to this point? Was this just a miscommunication, a logistical blunder that snowballed into public humiliation? Or was this the result of an internal memo passed between handlers, alerting security teams to block an attempted PR ambush at one of the most tightly controlled media events of the year? To understand the gravity of what took place that night, we must rewind. The Tonys have always been known as a sanctuary for the theater world. While movie stars and music icons do attend, there's an unspoken respect for the nature of the evening, an award show built around Broadway's finest rather than celebrity fanfare. The arrivals are orchestrated down to the second. Every gown approved, every interview coordinated, every moment on camera carefully cleared with the publicity team. So when someone arrives unannounced, bypassing the scheduled entrance list, red flags go up immediately. And yet, this was Meghan Markle, not a random influencer, not a YouTuber attempting to crash the Oscars. This was a woman who once walked behind Queen Elizabeth II during royal processions. who sat across from Oprah Winfrey during a globally televised tell-all. A woman who has been on the covers of magazines across continents. Her mere presence draws headlines. So why would the organizers risk the firestorm that was now about to ensue? The answer may lie in the project she was reportedly there to promote, a new docu-series titled, With Love, Meghan, under her ongoing deal with Netflix. The show, shrouded in secrecy, has been teased as a deeply personal look into her healing journey and reflections on womanhood, motherhood, and media betrayal. But insiders claim the premiere timeline was shifted suddenly, and Meghan was looking for a high-profile platform to begin teasing the series with her own voice, her own words. There were rumors, now partially confirmed by leaked emails, that Meghan had prepared a short, heartfelt statement she hoped to deliver at some point during the evening. Not on stage, but perhaps in an impromptu press interaction or pre-recorded red carpet moment. She would not name the series directly, but would speak about narratives and reclaiming truth. This, according to sources close to the Tony Awards press team, was seen as crossing a dangerous line. No one gets to hijack the night, one Broadway publicist reportedly texted another. Not even a duchess. The event's planners, fearing she would use the platform to spark a wave of attention centered on her personal brand, rather than the nominated artists and productions, allegedly issued a quiet directive. If Meghan Markle arrives without pre-clearance, she is not to be granted access. And so she wasn't. This was not a confrontation with shouting or anger. It was the coldness of silence, of procedure, of doors that refused to open even for royalty. And yet, the symbolism of the moment echoed loudly. Meghan, standing inches from the carpet, dressed for a spotlight that never arrived. Paparazzi catching every second of her stillness. Her name trending online within minutes. Not for a speech, not for an award, but for the image of her turned away. This opening sets the tone for everything to follow. In the chapters ahead, we'll take you behind the scenes of the security orders. We'll investigate the mysterious blacklist some allege she was placed on. We'll examine the growing tension between Meghan and Netflix executives over how she markets herself. And we'll trace the silent power struggle between celebrity privilege and institutional order, one that came to a head under the glitz of Broadway lights. Was this public rejection a one-time misstep, or the latest chapter in a long unraveling? The answers are messy, the implications far-reaching, and the tears very real. From the outside, the project looked polished, deeply personal, and potentially groundbreaking. Titled, With Love, Meghan, the Netflix series was quietly developed over the past year under tight security, veiled press coordination, and internal studio non-disclosure agreements. Not a single official trailer had been released. No public interviews. Just a short, cryptic post shared on Meghan's now silent Archwell social pages. A single black and white photo of her writing in a journal, accompanied by the caption, Truth, Light, Reclamation. But for those who had followed the former Duchess of Sussex's evolving media strategy, the signs were clear. This was going to be her next major move to reshape the public narrative surrounding her life, her family, and her purpose in the world of media. However, as the project grew, so did the pushback, internally and externally. According to 3 separate individuals with knowledge of Netflix's internal meetings, With Love, Meghan was greenlit as part of a last-ditch content fulfillment agreement stemming from the 2020 megadeal she and Prince Harry signed with the streaming giant. Though the couple had initially been celebrated as groundbreaking additions to the Netflix content lineup, the results had been mixed. Harry and Meghan, their first documentary series, had performed decently in viewership but was quickly overshadowed by backlash over its tone, perceived factual inconsistencies, and the relentless retelling of their royal grievances. Critics described it as a glossy PR exercise, and it led to no awards recognition, a devastating blow for a couple who had framed themselves as not only survivors but storytellers with something profound to say. Following that, their other Netflix efforts, including Harry's Heart of Invictus, failed to leave any cultural imprint. It became evident that Netflix was growing restless. Sources claimed that internal executives wanted content that felt organic, not orchestrated, and quietly pushed for something that shows who Meghan really is, not who she says she wants to be. This created friction. Meghan reportedly wanted full creative control, from scripting to visual tone to distribution rollouts. Her team presented a vision of a series that would be part memoir, part documentary, part confessional monologue, covering topics like motherhood, mental health, identity, love, betrayal, and yes, the media war. She wanted it to feel intimate and uncensored, something akin to a televised diary entry. But the studio had concerns. Netflix, though open to a vulnerable tone, was uncomfortable with what one executive privately described as a series of rehearsed vulnerability moments. There were multiple rounds of back and forth. Footage was cut, narration rewritten. Rumors circulated that Netflix hired an external consulting firm to reshape the structure of the series in secret, allegedly behind Meghan's back. She was said to be furious when edits came back trimmed down and softened in language, removing some of her more pointed references to former royal family members and to specific UK media houses. Adding to the tension was the absence of Harry. While the public had grown accustomed to seeing the Duke and Duchess operate as a unit, with love, Meghan was crafted deliberately to exclude him from the spotlight. In internal strategy memos, Netflix acknowledged the gamble. Removing Harry might alienate some viewers, but it would recenter Meghan as an individual brand, a woman outside the shadow of the monarchy and outside the role of a partner. She wanted to speak as Meghan, a producer said anonymously. Not as Harry's wife. Not as the Duchess. Just Meghan. But when you remove the titles and the associations, there has to be something truly compelling left to say. To build anticipation, Meghan's team had been planning a subtle media rollout, curated interviews with select journalists, exclusive sit-downs with fashion publications, a keynote speech at a women's conference, and, according to one publicist, a surprise moment at a major red carpet. That red carpet, many now believe, was the 2025 Tony Awards. At first glance, it made sense. Meghan has often spoken of her love for theater, even participating in student productions during her early years. The Tonys are broadcast globally but aren't as cluttered with film and pop celebrities, making it easier to stand out. More importantly, the theme of this year's Tony Awards was the power of storytelling, a theme her PR team likely saw as a perfect fit for her narrative repositioning. She didn't need a formal role, no nomination, no presenter slot. All she needed was access to the carpet, a few curated questions from friendly press outlets, and one soundbite, one authentic, off-the-cuff quote that could go viral. That's all it takes to shift a media cycle. Meghan's team was banking on it. But this approach didn't align with the rules. The Tony Awards have strict press and security protocols. Anyone planning to walk the carpet must be cleared at least 2 weeks in advance. Participation requires vetting, publicist approval, and adherence to guidelines that prevent unscheduled media events. Even surprise appearances must be negotiated behind closed doors to avoid disrupting the narrative arc of the evening's coverage. By showing up unregistered, without a confirmed seat or presenter role, Meghan's plan, however minimal, set off alarms. According to 2 sources from the event security detail, there had already been internal chatter that someone high-profile might try to use the red carpet for a stunt. Security was told to expect non-standard arrivals. And in one document, now circulating online, a code phrase was used, unauthorized messaging attempt. That was the term used to describe the risk of unapproved individuals using the media zone for personal publicity. The phrase wasn't explicitly tied to Meghan, but its timing and subsequent enforcement have left few doubting the target. The Netflix team, meanwhile, has gone silent. Repeated requests for comment about the incident and the series have been ignored. Industry insiders now speculate that the rollout of With Love, Meghan has been indefinitely delayed. Some even wonder whether Netflix is considering burying the project entirely, hoping to cut losses and avoid another reputational blow. What makes this situation even more complicated is that Meghan's documentary reportedly includes footage from personal therapy sessions, readings from her private journals, and a filmed segment where she visits her childhood home and speaks about feeling erased by the media. It was meant to be the culmination of everything she's been through, the misrepresentation, the silencing, the accusations, and a message to other women navigating toxic public scrutiny. But that message may never land, at least not the way she imagined. Critics argue that her attempts to create vulnerability have often backfired. When highly produced, her pain can feel performative. When too raw, it's called calculated. Meghan exists in a strange space, too famous to be ignored, too polarizing to be universally embraced. And in the high-stakes world of streaming content, that ambiguity can be a financial liability. Executives at rival studios are reportedly using the incident at the Tonys as a cautionary tale. One unnamed content buyer put it bluntly, if the press becomes the story, the project dies before it breathes. And that's the paradox Meghan now faces. The documentary was supposed to be her rebirth, her emergence not as a victim of media assault or royal exile, but as an independent thinker, a storyteller, a woman with wisdom to share. But instead, its unofficial launch is now tied to the image of her standing on the pavement, tears in her eyes, being turned away like an uninvited guest at her own show. If with love, Meghan does see the light of day, it will do so with this scene etched forever into its shadow. The audience will remember the stumble more than the speech. And the tragedy isn't just the public embarrassment, it's that her story, her voice, her truth may once again be drowned out not by critics, but by the execution of the rollout itself. There is a lesson buried deep in this moment, a lesson about timing, ego, messaging, and the unforgiving nature of the public eye. Meghan wanted to control her narrative, but narratives, once released, often take on lives of their own. Before the SUV even pulled up, before the first camera shutter snapped at her glittering entrance, Meghan Markle's name had already been circulating behind the scenes of the 2025 Tony Awards, but not on any official guest list. Her name appeared instead in a digital memo marked confidential, unverified entrance alert issued 2 days prior to the event by the private event security firm contracted to oversee the ceremony's logistics. The document was sparse, direct, and dispassionate. There was no emotion in its language, only procedural concern. One sentence stood out. Subject may attempt unauthorized red carpet access for the purposes of impromptu press interaction related to unapproved external media project. To those unfamiliar with the inner workings of high-level event planning, this phrase might sound overly cautious, harmless, even. But to professionals in the entertainment industry, particularly the ones in charge of crowd control and brand integrity, this was a red siren. The security memo, according to 2 insiders who reviewed the document, originated from the uppermost levels of the red carpet operations team. This wasn't some overzealous doorman overstepping his duty. This was deliberate, coordinated. It had gone through multiple layers of approval. And, more significantly, it didn't appear out of nowhere. Whispers had already reached event planners and publicists earlier in the week. One PR executive recalled receiving a call from a colleague at a major fashion house. She asked me if I had heard that Meghan might be doing a pop-in at the Tonys, the executive recalled. Not walking for a nomination or presenting. Just showing up, dressed to own the cameras. That's when we started getting nervous. In a city like New York, where major award shows like the Tonys are rehearsed down to the second, a surprise high-profile arrival can completely upend the rhythm of the red carpet. Outlets shift their cameras. Interviewers go off script. Stage managers are forced to reroute appearances to accommodate media interest. And when the individual in question is as polarizing and headline-dominating as Meghan Markle, the stakes rise even higher. The same PR executive explained the underlying fear. It's not that people hate her. It's that they don't trust the unpredictability. The media narrative can hijack the show. And this night isn't about her. That sentiment was echoed in the security memo, which further stated, should subject arrive without active credential or scheduled escort, direct to hold zone. Do not authorize carpet access until clearance is confirmed via command center. The use of the phrase subject, rather than Meghan's name, is standard industry protocol. It minimizes liability and emotional association, but it didn't go unnoticed among staffers. Everyone understood who it meant. Adding more fuel to the fire, an internal chat log surfaced among security team members. In it, one operative wrote, "Do we have the Markle plan active yet?" Another replied, "Command signed off. If she rolls up unannounced, escort to Lot B." Lot B, a service entry area away from cameras and guests, was not designed for red carpet entrance. It was used for staff and delivery personnel. The implication was unmistakable. If Meghan showed up without clearance, she'd be pulled out of sight. Quietly, firmly, and deliberately away from public view. That's not the treatment most celebrities receive, even ones who arrive unannounced. But Meghan's status straddles a strange line between celebrity and political flashpoint. Her presence is often charged. She can polarize crowds instantly. She has as many supporters as critics. And for the Tony Awards team, the primary concern wasn't politics, it was control. One staff member described the mood during rehearsals as tight with tension. No one wanted to be the person responsible for letting an unsanctioned PR stunt derail the evening. Everyone had heard rumors that Meghan's new Netflix project would begin teasing itself publicly this very week. What they didn't expect was that the first spark would come from their own red carpet. According to a source embedded within the media coordination team, there was also a last-minute scramble involving a red carpet interviewer from a major entertainment outlet. This journalist, reportedly close with Meghan's PR agency, had submitted an unusually detailed list of potential on-camera questions, one of which referenced upcoming streaming content about truth and transformation. That raised eyebrows. When asked to clarify whether this was tied to a known participant, the journalist deflected. But within hours, internal speculation had exploded. Meghan wasn't just planning to walk the carpet. She was preparing to speak. On the record. On camera. In a way that would likely dominate headlines before the event even officially started. And that, for the show's producers, was unacceptable. "We are storytellers," one producer told an industry blog just days earlier. The Tony Awards celebrate voices of the stage, not the sideshow of media drama. Though the quote didn't reference Meghan by name, several staffers reportedly interpreted it as a preemptive move to set boundaries. Adding yet another layer to this brewing storm was the involvement of a top executive from a major streaming competitor. Sitting on the Tony's production board, this individual reportedly expressed concern that any unvetted media appearance by Meghan, tied to Netflix, no less, could serve as backdoor promotion, even if subtle. It was a business issue at that point, one source explained, not just a security one. To prevent legal complications or accusations of defamation, the security memo was written with sterile language. But it gave security officers full authority to deny carpet access to any individual not on the verified guest list. That list had already been finalized and distributed by 6 p.m. on the night of the event. Meghan's name was not on it. Still, no one expected her to actually show up. That's what makes what followed so jarring. When her vehicle pulled in, security radio chatter reportedly lit up immediately. "It's her," someone said. "Confirm Lot B," another replied. But Meghan didn't go to Lot B. She stepped out near the main entrance, pressured perhaps by her team, confident perhaps that her presence alone would override the protocol. She was wrong. Within 2 minutes, the plan was in effect. The lead security officer, referencing the memo on his device, stepped forward and blocked her path. The images of that moment have since gone viral. But what those images don't show is what happened just after. One photographer captured a private conversation between two handlers behind a velvet rope. "She's crying," one whispered. "She didn't know this would happen? She thought she could walk in," the other replied. To be fair, it's possible Meghan didn't have all the details. Perhaps she believed her team had cleared things. Perhaps the memo wasn't shared with her. Or perhaps, and this is the version many now suspect, she knew there was no clearance but assumed her celebrity, her status, her symbolism would be enough. That assumption, if true, collided directly with a system built on gatekeeping. And the memo, dry, calculated, and quietly circulated, was the mechanism that ensured the gate stayed closed. The moment Meghan Markle was stopped at the velvet ropes, everything else on the red carpet seemed to slow down. For a few seconds, the buzz of flashbulbs and excited chatter dimmed, replaced by confused glances and murmured questions. The Tony Awards are usually a well-oiled machine, an elegant parade of celebrities who glide past the cameras with grace, pausing briefly for photos and interviews before disappearing inside the theater. But as Meghan stood in place, visibly flustered, attention began to drift toward her. And celebrities, never far from drama, even when cloaked in couture, took notice. An actress nominated that night for Best Lead in a Play, whose name we will withhold out of respect for her privacy, reportedly paused mid-interview as she noticed the stir across the carpet. "Is that Meghan Markle?" she asked a reporter nearby, her expression caught on an open camera feed. She leaned in, squinting toward the commotion, and then quietly stepped aside, motioning her publicist to wait. She wasn't the only one. Multiple attendees, actors, producers, designers, began to whisper among themselves. The Tony Awards may be focused on theater, but many in attendance live at the intersection of Hollywood and Broadway. Word spreads fast in such circles, and within minutes, the phrase "Meghan got stopped" began rippling through the press corridor. One stylist who had been dressing 3 nominees that evening said she received a flurry of texts all at once. "I had someone in hair and makeup asking me if Meghan was walking. And then I got a text that said, 'No, she's being blocked.' My first thought was, oh, God, this is going to explode." That explosion came in waves. On one hand, there were stunned observers who empathized with Meghan. Celebs and creatives who understood what it meant to be embarrassed in public, especially when dressed and prepared for an evening of recognition. On the other hand, There were those who rolled their eyes, muttering that the move was classic Meghan, high drama, per planning, media bait. One Broadway veteran, standing just feet away from the entrance as the moment unfolded, reportedly turned to a companion and said she knew what she was doing. The companion nodded slowly, lips tight. It's not her night. Inside the theater, where phones were temporarily checked and staff tried to maintain normalcy, the incident still bled into conversation. Between breaks in rehearsal and final wardrobe adjustments, the Meghan situation became the unspoken headline. Even performers prepping for live acts couldn't avoid the buzz. One stage manager said, "It was like this invisible fog over everyone's headsets." No one wanted to talk about it too loudly, but we all knew something had just blown up outside. Meanwhile, in the press tent, chaos began to brew. Reporters had caught sight of the commotion. Some managed to snap unauthorized shots. Others scrambled to get statements. A few junior reporters were seen dashing toward their editors, hoping to be the first to confirm what was unfolding. She was crying, one whispered breathlessly to a producer. I swear to God, she looked like she was about to collapse. And still, the reactions among celebrities themselves were anything but uniform. One actor known for his outspoken political views later posted a cryptic message on social media that many interpreted as support. There's a cruel kind of power in deciding who belongs. That's not what art is about. Though he didn't mention Meghan by name, the timing of the post, just minutes after the incident, left little room for doubt. In contrast, a different actress, also nominated that evening and considered a darling of the Broadway elite, reportedly rolled her eyes during a backstage conversation and said, "She's not even in a show. Why is she here?" That sentiment, while harsh, echoed what many inside the event felt privately, that Meghan's appearance was not in alignment with the spirit of the evening. She hadn't come to support a friend, nor had she been announced as a surprise presenter. She had come dressed for a moment, and when that moment didn't materialize, the entire system had to account for the disruption. Still, there were those who tried to soften the blow. A young musical composer, speaking quietly to a journalist during intermission, said, "Look, I get the protocols. But to see someone turned away like that, it just felt cold. She's still human." That's the thing about these moments. In the heat of a public mishap, the reactions reveal far more about the observers than the subject. Some used the moment as a chance to mock, treating it as the latest installment in a saga they viewed with growing impatience. Others, particularly women in the industry who had experienced similar rejections, saw it as something more tragic, another instance of someone reaching for the microphone only to be shut out by a gate too high, too guarded, too arbitrary. A well-known talk show host, attending as a guest presenter, reportedly texted a friend, "They could have handled that differently. She's not a threat." But whether Meghan was viewed as a threat, a nuisance, or a victim seemed to depend largely on how each individual saw her, and how they themselves had once been seen. Social media only amplified the split. In the hours following the denial, Instagram and Twitter lit up with takes from actors, influencers, and stylists who hadn't even attended the event. Some called it a public humiliation. Others framed it as consequence culture. A Broadway costume designer wrote, "Red carpet equals scheduled respect. You don't just drop in and expect the spotlight. That's not how this works." A young actress, known for her indie films and activism, pushed back. If Meghan Markle walks into a room and you panic, the problem isn't Meghan Markle, it's the room. But beneath the public debates, the most interesting conversations were the whispered ones. The ones traded in dressing rooms and stairwells and black cars as celebrities were ushered into the building. Some speculated that the incident was intentional, that Meghan had known full well she wouldn't be admitted and had planned to leverage the denial into a viral moment of exclusion. That kind of embarrassment plays well online, one actor murmured, implying that victimhood, when documented, garners more sympathy than mere participation. Others flatly disagreed, pointing out the genuine emotional toll seen on her face. "You can't fake that kind of devastation," said a director. She looked blindsided. "You don't script that unless you're a better actor than anyone gave her credit for." The truth likely lives somewhere in between. Meghan, ever aware of cameras, may have hoped her arrival would spark curiosity, not rejection. She may have assumed her name alone would grant her access, as it had so many times before. She may have misjudged the temperature of the room, the patience of the organizers, or the limits of her current public favor. And the celebrities who witnessed it? They didn't speak with one voice. They reflected the fracturing of an industry grappling with power, fame, and accountability. Some were empathetic. Some were cruel. Many were quietly relieved it wasn't them. As one young actress exiting her car near the end of the arrivals put it plainly, that could have been any of us if we misread the room. The black SUV was still idling at the curb when Meghan Markle turned back toward it. Her face, moments ago composed and media-ready, now showed unmistakable signs of emotional collapse. Her expression had cracked in front of dozens of eyes, some curious, others callous. Eyewitnesses recalled the way she stiffened as the security guard repeated his directive. She was not cleared, not scheduled, not invited. She didn't shout. She didn't argue. But the silence that surrounded her in those seconds was more devastating than any outburst could have been. What happened next was seen only by a few. Her assistant, her private security, and 2 or 3 publicists lingering behind a media barricade. But what they saw would travel quickly through the ranks of Hollywood gossip and press circles. Meghan Markle, stoic until that moment, breaking into tears as she stepped back into the vehicle. Not the dramatic, made-for-TV crying that skeptics might imagine. Not the performative, exaggerated kind captured in memes. This was a woman who had built walls for years, walls against the press, against the monarchy, against the internet, and who now, in a single instant, had those walls breached in the most public and unceremonious way imaginable. Inside the SUV, according to a source who rode with her for the first few minutes, Meghan sat in stunned silence. She didn't ask for the engine to start. She didn't call anyone. She just stared forward, blinking rapidly, her jaw clenched tightly enough to quiver. Her assistant, clearly rattled, kept checking her phone for updates from other members of the team. There had been no plan B. Meghan was supposed to step onto the carpet, exchange a few words with reporters, offer a short, heartfelt quote, nothing aggressive, nothing scandalous, just a whisper of presence. Enough to signal the arrival of her new Netflix project without overpowering the evening. That was the plan. That had been the pitch. But no amount of preparation could have accounted for the humiliation that came instead. There is no recovery strategy for being turned away in real time while cameras roll and the internet watches. As the SUV slowly rolled away from the venue, circling to avoid press areas, Meghan reportedly reached for her phone and called one person, Harry. He picked up on the first ring, the source said. She didn't even try to sound composed. She just said, "They blocked me. They actually blocked me." And then she started crying again. What followed was not the measured voice of a public figure crafting the next move. It was the voice of a woman who, once again, felt exiled, this time not by royalty, but by an industry she once thought would be her sanctuary. The call was short. According to the source, Harry told her to come home. "Just get home. We'll fix it later," he said. But even he sounded shaken. Whatever strategy they had agreed upon for the night had clearly gone off script. From there, Meghan's vehicle made a quiet detour, not to a restaurant or a hotel, but to a private townhouse in Midtown Manhattan, reportedly rented by one of her longtime stylists. It was a place she had used before as a dressing base, chosen specifically for its discretion. The moment she stepped inside, Meghan reportedly removed her earrings, slipped off her shoes, and collapsed on the edge of a velvet settee. "Everything was perfect," she said, according to someone present. "I did everything right. Why would they do that to me?" Her team surrounded her with reassurances, blaming the Tony Awards organizers, questioning the intentions behind the memo, and offering to draft a public response. But Meghan wasn't ready. She wasn't thinking in terms of damage control yet. She was still processing the sting of rejection, the raw and human pain of being publicly told, "You are not welcome here." What many don't understand is the psychological toll that comes with being globally recognizable. Meghan lives in a world where every smile is studied, every outfit dissected, every glance reinterpreted. For someone so used to projecting poise, the sudden unraveling of that image, especially in such a high-profile, celebratory setting, was more than an inconvenience. It was personal. She kept repeating the same thing, one aide recalled. "I thought we had approval. I thought they said yes." But no one had confirmed. The appearance had been loosely discussed, hinted at in emails, floated among publicists. There had never been an official confirmation from the Tony Awards team. Meghan's side had misjudged the openness of the room. They assumed that her presence, even unscheduled, would be welcomed. That assumption shattered as soon as the velvet rope remained still. And while outside, press outlets began uploading headlines like "Meghan denied at Tony's" and "Duchess drama on the red carpet." Inside that townhouse apartment, The tone was anything but theatrical. It was shell-shocked, tense, and grief-like. One staffer tried to pivot. "We can get ahead of this," she said, reaching for her laptop. "We drop a statement. We say it was a scheduling miscommunication. We own it. That way you don't look like you were trying to ambush the event." But Meghan wasn't ready to talk optics. "I don't want to spin it," she reportedly said. "I want to know why they did it." And that was the deeper wound, the belief that this wasn't just a mishap, but a deliberate move. A choice made by gatekeepers to humiliate her, to remind her that whatever influence she once held in Hollywood was no longer guaranteed. To some extent, Meghan had been living in a strange media vacuum. After stepping back from royal duties, she and Harry carved out a new life in California, one that blended philanthropy, parenting, production work, and curated appearances. But the reception from the broader public had grown increasingly complex. She still had millions of supporters, yes, but her critics had become louder, more organized, and often more cruel. This incident, whether she realized it immediately or not, played directly into that narrative. The idea that she had overreached, that she had miscalculated her importance, that the industry was beginning to close ranks. But behind closed doors, none of those thoughts offered comfort. As the night wore on, Meghan reportedly requested everyone leave her alone in the room for a while. No calls, no emails, no damage control. Just quiet. For about 20 minutes, she remained seated in that darkened lounge, phone face down on the table, staring at nothing in particular. A half-full glass of sparkling water sat untouched beside her. When her assistant returned, she found Meghan barefoot, her gown carefully folded across the back of the couch, her face stripped of makeup and expression. The hurt was no longer theatrical, it had settled into something heavier, less explosive, more resigned. "You think they'll talk about this forever?" Meghan asked. The assistant, unsure of what to say, replied, "Not forever." But both of them knew better. In the digital age, a moment like this doesn't vanish. It becomes a GIF, a screenshot, a meme, a story repackaged again and again, each time with a different slant. For her supporters, it would be proof of institutional exclusion. For her detractors, it would be validation. For the rest of the world, it would simply be content. Meghan may not have been allowed on the red carpet that night, but in a cruel twist of fate, she became the most talked-about person in the room without ever setting foot inside. Long before the red carpet meltdown at the 2025 Tony Awards, long before the Netflix deals and the royal exit, Meghan Markle was already navigating a precarious relationship with the entertainment industry. Her bond with Hollywood, sometimes warm, sometimes brittle, has always been based less on her talent or performance and more on perception. Meghan didn't just act in front of cameras. She courted them, and eventually she tried to control them. The entertainment world, however, is rarely tolerant of those who try to direct their own myth too aggressively. Meghan's first real taste of fame came with the legal drama Suits, a solid ensemble series with respectable ratings and a devoted following. Her role as Rachel Zane was well received, and while she never reached breakout status as a leading star, she was admired for her poise, her fashion sense, and her charitable work outside the show. At that stage in her career, Meghan was likable, accessible, and seemingly grateful. Casting agents considered her dependable. Talk show producers appreciated her candor. Red carpet reporters described her as gracious. But everything changed in 2016 when the rumors of her relationship with Prince Harry began to surface. Suddenly, Meghan's Hollywood narrative was no longer about the quiet climb of a biracial actress from California. It became about ambition. Headlines speculated on how she had snagged a prince. Tabloids accused her of social climbing. And within months, her identity as an actress was eclipsed by her role as royal girlfriend. Hollywood, for all its talk of reinvention and personal branding, is deeply tribal. And the tribe never forgets its own. Meghan's pivot from actress to duchess was not just a shift in title. It was seen by many as a rejection of her roots. She left the Screen Actors Guild. She walked away from auditions, red carpets, and the carefully maintained ecosystem of agents, publicists, and power dinners. To some, that was understandable. To others, it felt like betrayal. She ghosted the town, one casting director later said. Not just professionally. Socially. She disappeared. At first, there was awe. The Hollywood elite couldn't help but admire the sheer improbability of her trajectory. Meghan hadn't married a tech CEO or a hedge fund magnate. She had married into one of the most storied monarchies in the world. Overnight, she had entered a realm of symbolism, ceremony, and global scrutiny. That kind of transformation had no modern precedent. But awe in Hollywood is fleeting. By the time Meghan and Harry announced they were stepping back from royal duties in 2020, the industry's tone toward her had already begun to shift. She re-entered Hollywood not as an actress returning to the fold, but as a self-styled icon with new rules, new boundaries, and new demands. Instead of taking roles or attending auditions, she moved directly into the production space, securing a multi-million-dollar content deal with Netflix and another with Spotify. The message was clear. She wasn't coming back to the game. She was rewriting it. And for a time, that audacity was magnetic. Her interview with Oprah in 2021 captivated millions. The confessions, the accusations, the trauma, it all played like an expertly staged monologue. Meghan had turned her life into content, and for that brief cultural moment, she dominated the conversation. Production studios watched the ratings, tracked the reaction, and scrambled to figure out how to get in business with her. But the problems began almost immediately. Behind the scenes, producers and network executives discovered that working with Meghan was not simple. Multiple projects were pitched, approved, and quietly canceled. Timelines were missed. Budgets ballooned. Creative disagreements multiplied. At Archwell Productions, her media arm with Harry, turnover was high and morale was reportedly uneven. Industry insiders began referring to the couple, especially Meghan, as difficult to collaborate with. One Netflix producer, speaking off record, described the workflow as glacial, adding that everything had to be run through 10 people and none of them were aligned. Meanwhile, Meghan's public image started to erode. While she still had ardent defenders, the narrative of victimhood was wearing thin in some circles. Critics argued that she was too curated, too strategic, too eager to control every detail of her public persona. Others accused her of weaponizing identity politics when convenient, while avoiding accountability when projects underperformed. In 2023, Spotify unceremoniously canceled their content deal, citing a lack of deliverables. The podcast, Archetypes, had performed modestly, but it lacked staying power. Meghan reportedly felt blindsided, but the industry saw it differently. To them, it was a sign that the sheen was fading. By 2024, her public appearances were more limited. She no longer commanded the same red carpet buzz. Her invitation to the Met Gala had been quietly rescinded following sponsor pressure. She was noticeably absent from multiple award show presenter lineups. Even charity galas, where once her attendance guaranteed headlines, began prioritizing other figures. In private, some insiders whispered that she had become radioactive. The reasons varied. Some blamed overexposure. Others blamed the lingering controversy surrounding her and Harry's tell-all projects. But beneath it all was a more nuanced truth. Hollywood respects those who understand its rhythm. Meghan, it seemed, was marching to a beat of her own, one that didn't always sync with the industry's expectations. Her production strategy became increasingly insular. Instead of wide collaboration, she focused on projects that centered on herself, her voice, her perspective, her journey. That's not inherently wrong, but in an industry built on collective storytelling, it can raise flags. Executives at streaming platforms began to question the return on investment. One entertainment lawyer commented, "She's selling exclusivity, but not accessibility. She wants to be both the icon and the underdog." That's a hard story to sustain. And then came With Love, Meghan, the project meant to reset everything. According to those familiar with its production, this series was intended to be Meghan's purest expression yet. No palace drama. No royal flashbacks. Just Meghan as she saw herself. But the closer it came to launch, the more friction emerged. Meghan wanted creative control, but Netflix wanted pacing, structure, and commercial appeal. Her team wanted to avoid leaks, while the platform demanded early cuts for quality assurance. The rift deepened when Meghan refused to shoot a cross-promotional segment requested by Netflix, which would have involved other female creators on the platform. She reportedly told a colleague, "This isn't about them. This is about my voice." And so the divide widened. What began as a promising creative relationship turned into something more transactional and tense. By the time the Tony Awards rolled around in 2025, Meghan had effectively become a polarizing figure in the very town she once charmed. She was an outcast, but she wasn't embraced either. She floated in a kind of professional limbo, too famous to ignore, too fraught to fully welcome. This context matters deeply, because her attempt to walk the Tony Awards red carpet wasn't just a bold move. It was a test to see whether she still had enough residual goodwill to bypass formalities. A test to see if her presence alone could demand entry. Hollywood, it seemed, answered with a definitive no. But even that denial was more complicated than it appeared. In some ways, the entertainment industry never fully let go of Meghan. She was still newsworthy, still a topic at dinner parties, still capable of dominating a media cycle. What it let go of was the illusion that Meghan could operate outside the rules. To be part of the club again, she'd have to do what everyone else does, play the game. She would need to rebuild trust with publicists, producers, and press outlets. She would need to show up for others, not just herself. She would need to surrender, at least partially, the obsession with narrative control, and instead learn to collaborate again. Whether she's willing to do that remains to be seen. But what the Tony Awards incident proved beyond doubt is that Meghan Markle is no longer untouchable in Hollywood. And perhaps she never was. Long before Meghan Markle was stopped at the velvet rope outside the 2025 Tony Awards, she had already built a reputation for defying the protocols of another powerful institution, one older and more hierarchical than Hollywood could ever be, the British royal family. And although the red carpet isn't a palace, and Broadway isn't the monarchy, the echoes of past behavior resounded unmistakably. In both worlds, royal and entertainment, there are invisible rules, codes of conduct, unwritten expectations that govern who is allowed to speak, when they may speak, and in what manner. And in both realms, Meghan Markle has continuously shown herself to be a disruptor of those rules. The Tony Awards rejection may have seemed abrupt or even unjust to her supporters, but to industry insiders and royal observers alike, it wasn't surprising. In their view, it was merely the latest expression of a pattern that began the moment Meghan married into royalty. When she entered the royal family in 2018, Meghan quickly made headlines not just for her biracial background, American citizenship, or divorcee status, but for how she challenged centuries-old customs. The British monarchy, with its rigid ceremonial order and historical gravitas, expects new members to learn and respect its traditions. Instead, Meghan was perceived as questioning them, sometimes openly, sometimes through subtle defiance. Her wedding was the first major disruption. From her decision to walk herself partway down the aisle, to the inclusion of an American preacher and gospel choir, Meghan re-engineered the royal spectacle into a symbol of cultural inclusion and personal independence. The world watched and applauded, but behind palace doors, eyebrows raised. Then came the media control battles. Royal births are tightly choreographed affairs, usually accompanied by a public statement from the palace and a photo call featuring the newborn. But when Meghan gave birth to Archie in 2019, she and Harry skipped the traditional Lindo wing appearance entirely. Instead, they issued a heavily stylized, pre-approved photo with no media access. Worse yet, they initially kept the location of the birth a secret. For hours after Archie's delivery, even royal correspondents, who are typically briefed in real time, had no idea where Meghan was. Some speculated she gave birth at home. Others claimed she had left the UK altogether. In the absence of clarity, conspiracy theories flourished. Those who worked within the palace machinery later revealed how chaotic that day was behind the scenes. One former press aide said, "We weren't informed. We couldn't brief the press. It looked like a power grab." Another added, "There are traditions for a reason. It keeps speculation down." They didn't understand that, or didn't care. The ripple effects were significant. Not only did the media lose trust in the Sussexes, but palace officials began treating them as liabilities rather than assets. Meghan and Harry, frustrated by what they saw as institutional control and press abuse, pushed back even harder, culminating in their dramatic departure from royal duties in 2020. At the time, supporters hailed it as a courageous step. Meghan, many said, had refused to be silenced or controlled. But those within the palace saw it differently. In their eyes, she was a woman unwilling to follow the protocol she had married into. A woman who wanted the title but not the system. Now, years later, the same dynamic appears to be playing out in a different form. The entertainment industry, like the monarchy, functions on a series of implicit agreements. Appearances are scheduled, access is granted based on hierarchy, and public attention is managed through delicate choreography. But Meghan's approach has often been at odds with that rhythm. Her arrival at the Tony Awards, reportedly unapproved and uncoordinated, was interpreted not as an oversight but as another example of protocol defiance. There was no seat reserved, no name listed on the official guest directory, and yet she appeared, dressed, prepared, and expecting entry. To those familiar with her royal history, it was déjà vu. This is how she operates, one Hollywood publicist said. She enters closed systems and assumes they'll bend. Sometimes they do. Sometimes they don't. Even more telling is the way Meghan's presence, whether in the palace or at the Tonys, often becomes the main event. When she walked into a room as a working royal, reporters refocused their questions. Photographers chased her down corridors. Charitable causes she supported received immediate press attention, but so did the smallest of her missteps, an unbuttoned coat, an awkward hug, a choice of nail polish. In her efforts to control the narrative, she inadvertently magnified it. And that is the great paradox of Meghan Markle. Her determination to assert herself within rigid systems has both defined her appeal and fueled her criticism. To supporters, she's a woman of modern values, unwilling to submit to outdated traditions. To critics, she's a self-centered figure trying to bypass the very structures she claims to reform. The Tony Awards moment only sharpened this divide. The fact that Meghan was denied access didn't just sting because it was public. It stung because, in her eyes, she had likely done everything necessary to earn her place. She was a former royal, a global figure, and a content producer aligned with one of the most powerful platforms in entertainment. That, she may have believed, should have been enough. But it wasn't. Not in Buckingham Palace. And not on Broadway. What these institutions share is a deep resistance to disruption, especially disruption that isn't pre-negotiated. Both systems rely on predictability. Meghan's greatest asset, her unpredictability, clashes with that philosophy at every turn. In this light, the red carpet denial takes on a new meaning. It wasn't just a failure to gain access. It was a quiet but firm statement from an entire ecosystem. Your name is not enough anymore. This doesn't mean Meghan has no place in Hollywood. She does. Her story is powerful. Her platform is large. Her supporters are vocal. But what the entertainment industry, much like the royal family before it, seems to be saying is that presence must be earned through integration, not assumption. Interestingly, some of Meghan's supporters in the UK royal press have also started to draw parallels between her recent struggles and past royal tensions. A former royal commentator tweeted, "When she changed the script on royal births, people called it brave. When she changed the script on the red carpet, they called it arrogant. Same script, different audience." Others weren't as kind. One British tabloid headline read, "Same Meghan, different palace." There is a poetic irony in that comparison. Meghan has tried, time and again, to build a world outside the palace gates, to construct a career, an identity, and a legacy independent of royalty. But the habits formed within that royal struggle of challenging protocol, of asserting visibility, of circumventing tradition, seem to follow her wherever she goes. And institutions, whether ancient or modern, rarely tolerate those who rewrite the rules uninvited. In the end, the problem isn't that Meghan is disruptive. Disruption can be powerful. It can lead to reform, to healing, to progress. The problem is that she often disrupts without full buy-in from the spaces she seeks to transform. The monarchy resisted. The media recoiled. And now, the entertainment industry appears to be reinforcing its own boundaries. It is a difficult lesson, one that many women in high-profile roles have faced. You can speak your truth, but you may not always be granted the platform you seek, or the moment you expect. And perhaps the saddest part of it all is that Meghan, for all her resilience and messaging savvy, still seems to believe she can carve out space in these institutions without first acknowledging their structure. Whether that belief is bold or blind depends on who's watching. The reasons varied. Some blamed overexposure. Others blamed the lingering controversy surrounding her and Harry's tell-all projects. But beneath it all was a more nuanced truth. Hollywood respects those who understand its rhythm. Meghan, it seemed, was marching to a beat of her own, one that didn't always sync with the industry's expectations. Her production strategy became increasingly insular. Instead of wide collaboration, she focused on projects that centered on herself, her voice, her perspective, her journey. That's not inherently wrong, but in an industry built on collective storytelling, it can raise flags. Executives at streaming platforms began to question the return on investment. One entertainment lawyer commented, "She's selling exclusivity, but not accessibility. She wants to be both the icon and the underdog." That's a hard story to sustain. And then came With Love, Meghan, the project meant to reset everything. According to those familiar with its production, this series was intended to be Meghan's purest expression yet. No palace drama. No royal flashbacks. just Meghan as she saw herself. But the closer it came to launch, the more friction emerged. Meghan wanted creative control, but Netflix wanted pacing, structure, and commercial appeal. Her team wanted to avoid leaks, while the platform demanded early cuts for quality assurance. The rift deepened when Meghan refused to shoot a cross-promotional segment requested by Netflix, which would have involved other female creators on the platform. She reportedly told a colleague, "This isn't about them. This is about my voice." And so the divide widened. What began as a promising creative relationship turned into something more transactional and tense. By the time the Tony Awards rolled around in 2025, Meghan had effectively become a polarizing figure in the very town she once charmed. She was an outcast, but she wasn't embraced either. She floated in a kind of professional limbo, too famous to ignore, too fraught to fully welcome. This context matters deeply, because her attempt to walk the Tony Awards red carpet wasn't just a bold move. It was a test to see whether she still had enough residual goodwill to bypass formalities. A test to see if her presence alone could demand entry. Hollywood, it seemed, answered with a definitive no. But even that denial was more complicated than it appeared. In some ways, the entertainment industry never fully let go of Meghan. She was still newsworthy, still a topic at dinner parties, still capable of dominating a media cycle. What it let go of was the illusion that Meghan could operate outside the rules. To be part of the club again, she'd have to do what everyone else does, play the game. She would need to rebuild trust with publicists, producers, and press outlets. She would need to show up for others, not just herself. She would need to surrender, at least partially, the obsession with narrative control, and instead learn to collaborate again. Whether she's willing to do that remains to be seen. But what the Tony Awards incident proved beyond doubt is that Meghan Markle is no longer untouchable in Hollywood. And perhaps she never was. Long before Meghan Markle was stopped at the velvet rope outside the 2025 Tony Awards, she had already built a reputation for defying the protocols of another powerful institution, one older and more hierarchical than Hollywood could ever be, the British royal family. And although the red carpet isn't a palace, and Broadway isn't the monarchy, the echoes of past behavior resounded unmistakably. In both worlds, royal and entertainment, there are invisible rules, codes of conduct, unwritten expectations that govern who is allowed to speak, when they may speak, and in what manner. And in both realms, Meghan Markle has continuously shown herself to be a disruptor of those rules. The Tony Awards rejection may have seemed abrupt or even unjust to her supporters, but to industry insiders and royal observers alike, it wasn't surprising. In their view, it was merely the latest expression of a pattern that began the moment Meghan married into royalty. When she entered the royal family in 2018, Meghan quickly made headlines not just for her biracial background, American citizenship, or divorcee status, but for how she challenged centuries-old customs. The British monarchy, with its rigid ceremonial order and historical gravitas, expects new members to learn and respect its traditions. Instead, Meghan was perceived as questioning them, sometimes openly, sometimes through subtle defiance. Her wedding was the first major disruption. From her decision to walk herself partway down the aisle, to the inclusion of an American preacher and gospel choir, Meghan re-engineered the royal spectacle into a symbol of cultural inclusion and personal independence. The world watched and applauded, but behind palace doors, eyebrows raised. Then came the media control battles. Royal births are tightly choreographed affairs, usually accompanied by a public statement from the palace and a photo call featuring the newborn. But when Meghan gave birth to Archie in 2019, she and Harry skipped the traditional Lindo wing appearance entirely. Instead, they issued a heavily stylized, pre-approved photo with no media access. Worse yet, they initially kept the location of the birth a secret. For hours after Archie's delivery, even royal correspondents, who are typically briefed in real time, had no idea where Meghan was. Some speculated she gave birth at home. Others claimed she had left the UK altogether. In the absence of clarity, conspiracy theories flourished. Those who worked within the palace machinery later revealed how chaotic that day was behind the scenes. One former press aide said, "We weren't informed. We couldn't brief the press. It looked like a power grab." Another added, "There are traditions for a reason. It keeps speculation down." They didn't understand that, or didn't care. The ripple effects were significant. Not only did the media lose trust in the Sussexes, but palace officials began treating them as liabilities rather than assets. Meghan and Harry, frustrated by what they saw as institutional control and press abuse, pushed back even harder, culminating in their dramatic departure from royal duties in 2020. At the time, supporters hailed it as a courageous step. Meghan, many said, had refused to be silenced or controlled. But those within the palace saw it differently. In their eyes, she was a woman unwilling to follow the protocol she had married into. A woman who wanted the title but not the system. Now, years later, the same dynamic appears to be playing out in a different form. The entertainment industry, like the monarchy, functions on a series of implicit agreements. Appearances are scheduled, access is granted based on hierarchy, and public attention is managed through delicate choreography.